We're studying this evening in the book, section 31, XXXI, under the heading, Healing a Demonic in a Synagogue at Capernaum. The scriptural references that we're looking at here in this parallel is Mark 1, verse 21 through 28, and in Luke 4, verse 31 through 37, if you're not using the book. You just have two spots there that we're going to kind of be combining together. As we begin, the beginning verse that Brother McGarvey has, and we're going to be going back and forth between Mark and Luke, but Mark 1:21 says, "And they go into," or he came down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, "and straightway on the Sabbath day he entered into the synagogue and taught," was teaching them. "And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as having," his word was with authority, "not as the scribes. And straightway there was in there, the synagogue, a man with, that had, it says, a spirit of an unclean demon." And as we go down further, it says, "And he cried out with a loud voice, saying, Ah, what have we to do with thee, Jesus, thou Nazarene? Art thou come to destroy us? I know thee who thou art, the Holy One of God. Jesus rebuked him, saying, Hold thy peace, and come out of him. And when the demon, unclean spirit, had thrown him down in the midst, tearing him and crying with a loud voice, he came out of him, having done him no hurt. And they were all amazed. Amazement come upon all, insomuch that they questioned among themselves, and they spake together one with another, saying, What thing is this? What is this word? A new teaching. For with authority and power he commandeth even the unclean spirits, and they come out, and they obey him. And the report of him went out straightway, and there went forth a rumor concerning him, everywhere and to every place, the region of Galilee round about." And so we have this account that speaks to some of the, not necessarily the first miracles, but some of, or one of the earlier miracles that he did when he was back in Galilee after he had, last week we had been looking, he'd called Peter and Andrew and James and John and called them to be disciples. And as we've said, Capernaum and the area round about there was where Peter, Andrew, James, John had been fishing, had business, lived. And so Jesus moves from Nazareth, his base of operation, so to speak, now comes into the area of Capernaum. And that will be his base of operations, if you want to call it that, during his time and ministry in Galilee. And having came down to Capernaum, which was a city of Galilee, we're told on the Sabbath day he entered into the synagogue and taught, or was teaching them, according to Mark and Luke. Jesus' practice was to be in the synagogue on the Sabbath day. And I think he sets a good tone. You know, somebody says, do we really need to be in church every time the doors are open? My only question is, which time is the door open that Jesus doesn't show up? You know, Jesus set a practice, and the practice among the Jewish people of that day, of course, was that the worship was in the synagogue on the Sabbath day when they weren't in the midst of one of the high holy days, one of the festivals. Then they were in their hometown, and most of the significant sized communities had a place appointed where they would assemble. And the word synagogue comes from the idea of assembly. And so it was a place where you could expect the Jews to assemble together. And so we're told here again with that idea, straightway on the Sabbath day, he entered into the synagogue. Now it goes on to say that he taught and was teaching them, but again, look at the word straightway. You know, the idea conveyed there is that there was never a question in the mind of Jesus where he was going to be on a Sabbath day. You know, there was no question when he was traveling, even into a strange city among the Jewish people. Again, can't imagine him saying, well, I think I'll skip this Sabbath day. I need some rest. The disciples need some rest. It's been a busy week. You know, we've raised the dead. We've healed the sick. You know, we've cast out demons. It's a tough week, you know. Straightway, you know, I just kind of get the idea that, you know, when the doors are open, there he is. I don't know what the custom was specifically at that time, but Nine and I have been in Myrtle Beach on several occasions, and there's a synagogue that we would pass on the way up and down the street on Saturday morning. And on the corner of the street where the synagogue is, at a certain time, and I don't know exactly what time it is, but at a certain time, one of the men, perhaps the cantor from the congregation there at the synagogue, will come out with his tallit on and his skull cap, and he will come out with his ram's horn, and he will stand there on the corner and blow the ram's horn to alert any that is in the immediate area that the synagogue is about to enter into worship. And that's kind of the equivalent that most churches used to have a bell that they would ring so that people who were coming in the horse and buggies and the buckboard and walking, they could hear the bell ringing. It's like you need to pick up the pace if you want to get there by the time church starts. And so the idea is straightway. You know, the Jewish people, you know, they blew the trumpet, the shofar, as they would refer to it. They blew the shofar. It was blown in the temple to acknowledge. Again, churches would ring their bells at the appropriate time, whatever that was decided, to let people know. The Muslims have a call. Someone's up in a tower calling to all the people to enter into. So the point of all that is Christian, Jews, Muslims, you know, they all have a concept that we're going to begin worship at a certain time. And so the idea here expressed in Jesus is straightway on a Sabbath day, when the doors of the synagogue were open, he was on his way. And once he entered there, we're told that he taught and was teaching them. Now, some synagogues, I'm sure, had a regular rabbi, regular teacher who would present the lessons, and then perhaps there were other congregations, other synagogues that did not necessarily have as we would think of it, as a full-time person. And so a man of the congregation would present a lesson. And we also know that traveling or visiting persons, guests to the synagogue, were also, it was an honor to come up to the podium and to either read scripture. They could read scripture, or if they had a lesson, they could teach, and they would consider some of those things. And as Jesus gets started, and as he's been teaching, and the people who heard him when he was down in Jerusalem, and perhaps some of them followed him when he was in Judea for a while before he came back to Galilee, began to follow him and listen to him and invite him to what we would think preach or to teach. And one of the terms that is used many times is master. Sometimes he's referred to as rabbi, and sometimes he's referred to as teacher. But all three of those things all pretty much mean the same thing. One who is in the process of teaching, either in a congregation type setup or perhaps teaching in a school. And so many times, again, we hear Jesus referred to from the Jewish people as rabbi. And so it wasn't necessarily, as I read, one of those things where you have to go to rabbinical school and you have to spend so many years. And now, of course, there are various conferences among the Jews, just like there are denominations among Christians, and you go to the Jewish schools, whichever particular flavor you're a part of, and you receive ordination from them, just like the denominations do the Christians, that they're ordained into the Reformed Judaism or this Judaism, that conservative. Yes?
Well, I was just thinking there had to be, when he went into the synagogues, there had to be enough of the believing Jews that he was allowed to speak, right?
Well, and again, even if he wasn't the main speaker, as I understand it, the custom was of that time at the end of the service, again, the podium was opened up to anybody who had we hear that anybody had a psalm that they wanted to sing, or if they had something that they wanted to say, again, like I said, we look at the clock, and if it's Bible study or Sunday night, we got to hit that 1 hour mark. And if it's Sunday morning, we don't want to go past 2 hours, because that'd be terrible. But for the Jewish people, the Sabbath day was an all-day thing. The whole day was a day of rest, a time devoted to God. And so they got in no hurry. Now I know there are some today, I've read where some talk about people come into the synagogues today, and instead of them doing things kind of in unison together, some people come early, some people come late, and of course there's certain prayers that you read out of the prayer book that they use, and some of them will come in and they'll be praying 50 miles an hour to hurry up and get through the prayer book so they can get on to whatever they want to do. But in Jesus' day, it was a little bit different. Rabbis were not as strict. Anybody who taught was a rabbi. Chris is in the back tonight teaching the young people, and so in Jewish terms, he would be considered a rabbi. He's a teacher. And so it wasn't as formal of a setup. And so it was easy for them when Jesus began to preach and teach. They just automatically accepted him as teacher or rabbi. And so they listened to him. And as we see here, they were astonished at his teachings. This is some of the things that we read about in the latter part of what we call the Sermon on the Mount, because he spoke with such authority. There's a difference between, if you wrote the book and somebody else wrote the book. God help you if you're ever in a college class and the teacher's the one who wrote the textbook, because they know what it says. And so it's pretty hard. I mean, when they speak with authority based on, I'm the one who wrote the textbook. I'm telling you, this is the way it is. Well, in a way, that's the way Jesus was. He wrote the book, or the books, as we think of it. He is the Word. And so when he was speaking, it wasn't just like he was speaking for somebody else. It was as if he was speaking for himself, and that's what he was doing, or speaking on behalf of God. And so the scribes would always, talk about, what it says here or what it says there, and they were quoting, of course, from the Scriptures, and they would speak about the traditions of the fathers. The Pharisees especially, they had control of the synagogues, and so the Pharisees and the scribes that were in the synagogues were also concerned with the traditions of the fathers. And so Rabbi so-and-so said this person said that. And so they quoted people, they quoted the Scripture, they mixed it all together. This particular teacher at this particular school had this way of viewing things. But Jesus we see just on the Sermon on the Mount, he said things like, you've heard it said, but I say unto you. And a statement like that challenges the authority of what has been said, but I say unto you. It has been said, you've read, he begins to talk about these things in a way that they weren't used to getting it. And what do you say? I mean, Jesus can have somebody, get one of the scrolls and unroll it so he can read from it, but he could quote it just as good as he could read from it. And so, he most definitely gave the scribes a run for their money, because when he quoted Scripture, they knew he was quoting Scripture. I mean, he wasn't making stuff up. Even those who were the scribes, who copied the scrolls, when he stood there and talked or said or discussed what was written, wasn't really a whole lot that they could say about it. And so the people were astonished. They were amazed that they had someone who spoke with such authority and such power. And of course, when you have somebody like that, in the background, there's always somebody going to get their feelings hurt. When all these people start giving Jesus attention and all excited and talking about him, who aren't they talking about? The scribes and the rabbis and the regular teachers and all that are there. And when they start publishing the things that Jesus is doing throughout the area of Galilee, again, feelings get hurt. You never ran around telling people what a good sermon I gave last Sabbath, and everybody's, talking about what he's done and what he did and what he said. And, again, y'all don't talk about me that way. And why don't you talk about me that way? And even Pilate knew that for envy they had delivered him up. He could taste the jealousy as he saw the pettiness of what they were trying to do there. And so from the very beginning, like I said, he hits the ground running, and it does cost him a wheel. And God, straightway there was in their synagogue or the synagogue, a man that had an unclean spirit. And here, in some places, we see the statement made of an unclean spirit or a spirit unclean, and then demons. Sometimes we talk about demons or devils, and sometimes, again, depending on which translation you're using. Some use it demon, some use devil, evil spirit. But we understand that these entities came and possessed individuals. Brother McGarvey spends a lot of time, and if you are interested in a discussion of demons and devils and all of that, you can spend some time looking at what he says. But, these are, some, it says here that even the Greeks had this belief, and most people had beliefs of evil spirits, and that people, when they died, of course, become ghosts. We still deal with people today who want to talk about ghosts and the possession of an individual by a ghost or the spirit of someone who is departed. But it's clear, the Greeks had this idea, Brother McGarvey says, that a demon could either be good or bad. They didn't necessarily believe them to be completely evil. Now, that's the Greeks. That was kind of their view. Of course, in the New Testament, when we're speaking about devils, we use that term devil, so we pretty much know, when we're talking about they were possessed of a demon or a devil, our view of that from the Scriptures and Jesus' view of that is completely, that they are in an adversarial role with God. The Muslims kind of have the idea of the jinn, from which we get the word genie. And the jinn are spirits, but they're not spirits exactly like angels. The Muslims teach that they're made of fire. And, they kind of sometimes are tricksters. Some of them are evil, some of them are good. And I think they kind of borrowed that idea from the Greeks, maybe, that some are good, some are helpful, some want to help, and others, they want to trick you or they want to taunt you or torment you. But in the Scriptures, we find statements like evil spirits, unclean devils. Unclean bears with it a sense that it's not holy. It's not set apart or dedicated to God. In the Old Testament, the idea of something being unclean was that it had not been set apart for God, or it had been defiled and made unusable in the service of God. And so these spirits, as he mentions here, had knowledge of Jesus and had knowledge above what the average person does. They recognized Jesus. They acknowledged him. They interacted with him. There's always been a discussion as to why in the time of Jesus were there so many evil spirits running around in the world. And we really don't get a direct answer for that. And they were those in the Old Testament who would supposedly attempt to call up the dead and speak to the dead. We have an example of Saul trying to call up the spirit of Samuel and different things that were going on. But yes?
Not to change the subject a little bit. On the radio last week, the Exorcist movie was number one overall for all these years of horror films ever made.
The Exorcist.
It's number one, still yet.
Again, that's what you would call classic horror type.
I guess.
I mean, I've never seen it, so I don't. I've never seen it, but I have heard about it ever since I was probably 7 or 8 years old, whenever it came out in the '60s, and so and at the time, it was at that time when they were pushing the envelope of special effects and all that, and so there were a lot of people that were kind of traumatized just by watching the movie, and so it was something people.
This is just, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but do you think that happens today? A lot of people still think it does.
The Bible is very specific about, staying away from people that they refer to that were charmers, sorcerers, those kind of individuals. I don't know if one spends a great deal of their time, if you can open a door that, you're tinkering with something that you shouldn't. And when God shuts a door, maybe you ought not peek under it or open it up and peek in it. I have some, I have some questions about things in the sense that while they don't just happen, is it possible to invite them basically into your life through actions and deeds? I've had a lot of people, or I've heard a lot about people tinkering around with Ouija boards and all that stuff. I remember when I was a kid, those things were like sold as toys, and those are intended for use in seances and all that stuff, and inviting people to. And I've heard people talk about, during the games and all, they've been talking to what they believe is someone who's answering questions and saying things and talking supposedly from the other side. And again, what those are, is it made up? Is it their imagination? I don't know. One answer that at least I have that I give is that these evil spirits were allowed to pierce the veil, so to speak, in Jesus' day, so that people would have been afflicted by them, and he could perform miracles. Many of these people were afflicted for many years, and then Jesus comes and just with a command, they depart. Legion's one of those, he was possessed by many. The name was Legion, for we're many, and they, on a good day, seems would try to chain him up and bind him, and they would try to take him somewhere and put him somewhere where, and he would break the chains and come out and continue to taunt and haunt them.
Now, is leprosy, was it considered a demonic thing?
Leprosy was a disease.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. And that's another thing that, some people today say that, they refer to certain things like the demon leprosy or the demon alcohol. Well, that's not a demon. I mean, you're alcoholic, you don't have a demon, you've got a problem, but it's not coming from a demon. And there are some who try to explain many of these things that happen, that, these illnesses and all that are described, but the scriptures seem to differentiate between evil spirits, demonic, and then those who were troubled with a physical problem, that they were crippled or had a deformed hand. It's never really mentioned as being a spirit that did that. There was something physically wrong with them. And so it is clear that there were unclean spirits. And, some have said that these are, again, the angels that had fallen, that were allowed to pierce back through the veil. And we do know the devil has, we know that he has power and effect. We know that he can't tempt us above what we're able, but it doesn't mean that he can't tempt us. And so, we have those, Peter says that your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion walketh about seeking whom he may devour. And so Paul, when he's writing to the Thessalonians, said that he had wanted to come back on other occasions, but Satan hindered him. And so even in the time of the apostles and in their writings, they were still speaking about the influence of the devil and his minions, if you want to call them that, who work from the other side. And when you look at what Paul says in the book of Ephesians, the 6th chapter, he says, we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but, he talks about spiritual wickedness in heavenly or spiritual places. And so there is this demonic battle, this demonic war, which is going on between God and the devils, the demons. And so we don't have a full view into all of that specifically, but we do know that, there are still the angels of God, and then there are those who are in league with the devil, and they are referred to as spirits, and so in that sense they're not referred to as some kind of corporeal, physical kind of being, and so they are in spirit form, which they're able to inhabit someone physically, as we see here. And Jesus called them out. Matthew 8:29 is one of the references that it uses here, where they ask, or have you come to torment us before the time? And so to them there was an acknowledgement that there was a set time of judgment and a time that they would be punished and tormented, but this wasn't it. And so they were questioning why Jesus was there, what he was doing. And of course the devil did not fully understand what Jesus was doing either, because Paul said, had the princes of this world knew, they would never have crucified Jesus, and the devil would have done everything in the world to keep him from dying on the cross if he knew that was really God's plan. So he isn't all knowing. He's capable of making mistakes too, as much as he's a good observer of humanity, and he's good as a trickster of tempting. He's not infallible either, because he was outsmarted by God. And Jesus commands them, or commands the demon to come out. And there was a cry with a loud voice, and here that we see, and they're interacting with Jesus. And one of the things that's said here is, I know thee who thou art, the Holy One of God. And so there was a recognition of who Jesus was by the demon. And that's when he begins to confess Jesus as being the Holy One of God. That's when he rebuked him to hold his peace and come out. And we're told then that the demon threw him down in the midst. And it seemed that, again, he was literally tearing him, as it describes here, crying with a loud voice. But he came out and did no harm. From standpoint, it looked like, he was really literally going to tear the guy apart. And this is some of the scary things that go along with that. But again, miracles and the miraculous and that kind of thing went away, in the early days of or at least the days leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem kind of went away. But to me, there's still kind of a question mark, as to the demonic aspect. The devil can't tempt us above what we're able to bear. But the other side of that is if you invite him into your life wholly and fully, what can he do? And that's when you look at some of the people out there, and again, some of these people, I don't know if they have mental problems. Some of these individuals that we read about, serial killers, they claim that they heard voices. That's, from a medical standpoint, that could be schizophrenia. I mean, I've seen people interacted with people who suffered from schizophrenia, and they heard voices. They saw angels. They talked to angels when they were off their meds. But when you put them back on their medication, the angels stopped talking to them, and they didn't see them anymore. So, that again leaves a question mark. Some of these who claim that when they were doing this, someone else was in control. That's at least what they claimed, some of them. And was there somebody else in control of them? But if you open a door and you invite the devil in and you ask him to just use you however he wants, I don't know what he's capable of doing in that sense. I know God will protect the child of God, and I know from the study we had of Job, we see that God turned Job over to the influences of the devil, and he was able to take his children, take his possessions, take his health. And so, there's a big question mark that's in the midst of all of that. But for the general concept of these evil spirits that we saw and the degree to which they were there, I mean, when we look at the scriptures, it seems like almost every city you went into, there was somebody that had an unclean spirit. And when we read about this, and sometimes it says, and the people with unclean spirits, they left and they were delivered. And so it seems like it was, now whether that's right or not, but if you read the New Testament, there just kind of seems to be an air there that you expected almost every city to have somebody who was possessed. And again, it was everything from someone's son, their children, all the way up to adults. Does anybody else have any more questions about that?
I want to ask you one here. On Mark 1, the 30th verse.
30?
30th verse. About the Simon's wife mother laid sick of a fever, and they tell him of her, and he
that's in the next lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, reading back over here, it said in Matthew 8, and when Jesus, Matthew 14, and when Jesus was coming to Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother. He called him Peter over here, and the same thing. He lifted her hand up, and she come anointing and minister unto them. Same thing over here.
Yeah.
Who was he referring to? Simon Peter?
Yeah.
Okay, but he...
Sometimes the scriptures refer to him as Simon, which is his actual name, and Peter is a nickname which was given to him by Jesus. Sometimes he's referred to as Simon.
One over here and the other over here.
Well, again, you're looking at two different writers. Again, I don't know what your nickname is, but your name's Richard, but I've seen people referred to as Rick. They'll call him Dick. They give them all these different names, and that's not their formal name. But again, they have a nickname. I had an uncle whose name was John, and they called him Jack, and I never did figure out how that shortened anything. John's a 4-letter word, and Jack's a 4-letter word, and you got John Kennedy, and people called him Jack. and Jack Kennedy, and you know, I don't know how that works, but that's what we're looking at. You know, you got different people who are writing, and they, you know, somebody who doesn't know you that well might call you Richard, and you may have a nickname that I'm not even familiar with that other people know you by, and they may, you know, use that name. And so if a different person who has a little bit different perspective of Jesus, you know, to some people, Peter no doubt was Simon. You know, to me, it would be kind of hard if I was John, for example. You know, I'd known him as Simon. You know, we've been fishing together for years. We grew up together. Our fathers had a partnership, and we worked together. You know, all I ever knew him as Simon. And so it would be hard for me when I'd be writing about him to use Peter, because I never knew him as Peter. Jesus calls him Peter. People call him Peter, but I don't know him by that name. But when, you know, if you know somebody by a certain name, that's like Timmy. That was never his name. What was his name? Irvin. Everybody called him Timmy. It had nothing to do with his, they just called him Timmy. And again, you know, people know people by different names, and so that's it for writing from different perspectives.
I thought he was talking about Simon Peter.
Yeah.
You know, why he separated
But
out
yeah,
and quoted the same words, you know.
yeah, you're just getting a couple different perspectives, and that's what we're, you know, when we're looking at this here, you'll see where all that's, you know, sometimes when we're talking about Simon, it'll put Peter in parentheses or whatever, because in one place he's called Simon, in another place he's called Peter, in other places he's called Simon Peter, in that sense. But again, the demon, the unclean spirit, again came out, and we're told that they were all amazed, and amazement come upon all. And so these are, you know, we talked about wonders and signs, you know, and you could look at it either way. His casting out demons is a sign that he has power over unclean spirits, but people were amazed by it, and so it could be a wonder at the same time. So miracles, signs, wonders, again, depending on, you know, what it is and what the effect is and how people respond to it, they're really all dealing with the same kind of thing. They spoke with, again, one to another, saying, what is this? You know, what is this word, this teaching? For not only was he speaking with authority, not as the scribes and the other rabbis, but, you know, what kind of power is he commanding that even the unclean spirits obey him? You know, that's not something that they were, you know, people taking charge. People suffered for years, tried every way to get rid of these evil spirits. But Jesus comes on the scene and he casts them out, and they all go out. And he has that authority. And so we're told that a report of him went out straightway, again, from there. And rumors concerning him, you know, here we go. You see what he does, you've heard what he says, but when you start talking about him, what do you say? You know, not only are you now talking about fact, but then you inject what you believe, what you think. And so you start dealing now in rumors also. You know, that, and some tried later to spread the rumor that he cast out devils by the prince of demons, Beelzebub. And so they tried to cast rumors about Jesus that were negative. And so, you know, we've all played, I think, or seen the game of gossip played. You know, we talk to somebody over here, we whisper to them, and then they whisper all the way around. Everybody adds a little bit and changes it, and by the time it gets to this side over here, it's nothing like what it was over there. So as somebody went and told someone, you should have been there on the Sabbath, so-and-so, they cast the demon out, he did this, he said that, and then the next thing you know, he's healed 100 people, and again, it just snowballs. People tend to add to that and build it up even more. And then hearing those kind of rumors, and even if it was nothing more than the truth that they were talking about, others with demons, others who were sick, others who were suffering from various infirmities, as we're going to see, they're going to start purposely looking for him and seeking to have him heal them also.
In closing this evening, we wish to thank you again for spending your time in study with us. We hope the lesson has been uplifting and motivational. We encourage you to return again for our next lesson. Until then, may we invite you to visit our website. You will find many study opportunities. Our resource page has links to the Gospel Broadcasting Network, a 24/7 station with many great Christian programs and speakers. In Search of the Lord's Way, with Brother Phil Sanders. We have 2 links for Bibles and downloadable software. If you are looking to really expand your knowledge, perhaps you might like to try World Video Bible School, a college-level learning site free of charge. So, until next time, may God bless and keep you in His care as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the churches of Christ salute you.